This is Truthout Interviews. I'm Ted Asregadoo. On April 17th in the town of West, which is located 20 miles outside of Waco, Texas, this happened.
Oh, you okay?
Yeah.
You okay?
I can't hear. I can't hear.
A massive explosion in a fertilizer plant that killed 15 and injured hundreds. One of the chemical compounds stored at the facility in West was anhydrous ammonia. It's an extremely hazardous chemical that is also used in industrial refrigeration. Now, this accident is not a one-off. Indeed, a number of chemical-related mishaps have happened in the past 15 years, and the number is reached up to about 700. Here to talk about these incidents and what's being done to address public safety is Truthout writer Mike Ludwig. Hello, Mike. Welcome back to Truthout Interviews.
Hi, thanks for having me again, Ted.
Absolutely. First off, the chemical I mentioned at the outset is not the one believed to have exploded. Federal investigators say that it's most likely ammonium nitrate, but there was a large amount of anhydrous ammonia stored there as well. Is that correct?
Right, and you know, after looking at that video, it's tough to imagine that the large stores of this other dangerous chemical, anhydrous ammonia, was not impacted by that explosion. There were two containers of about 12,000 gallons of this poisonous gas and liquid stored at the facility, and you know, obviously, we don't know exactly what happened as investigators are still looking through the damage, but it's very probable that that dangerous chemical was released.
And that explosion was something that I think jarred a lot of collective memory, the collective memory of people here in the United States of the massive explosion, the terrorist attack in Oklahoma City back in 1995. And that was also a chemical bomb. Now, this wasn't a chemical bomb. This was a fertilizer plant that stored a chemical. Was the essentially the active ingredient this anhydrous ammonia? Is that ammonia? Is this similar to what was used by Timothy McVeigh and his cohorts?
You know, I can't exactly remember what kind of explosive they used. I remember it perhaps having something to do with fertilizer, and this was a fertilizer plant. And you know, there's several combustible materials that go into making fertilizer. One of those is ammonium nitrate, and another is anhydrous ammonia, which is also stored and used in these facilities for various reasons, and it's also combustible. And there have been incidents in the past where it's caught on fire. There's been several accidents where there's been fires at facilities where it's being stored, and when you kind of add all these up across the country over the past 15 years, according to the Center for Effective Government, there's been about 1,000 accidents either you know, involving anhydrous ammonia or in the same facility as this dangerous, very dangerous chemical is being stored.
You talked about how many of these accidents have occurred, up to 1,000 in the last 15 years. The Center for Effective Government published a map, which you linked to on your article in Truthout, that shows where these chemical accidents have happened. Now, as you look at this map and survey it, do you have any quick takeaways about where these accidents are located, or what you can infer from just looking at it?
You know, a couple quick things stand out to me on this map. There are, you know, thousands of facilities that store this dangerous chemical, but nearly 700 of them have had accidents, and 133 of these facilities have had multiple accidents. And when you look at this map, depending on, you know, the size of the dot that they've used to mark this facility, that'll tell you how many accidents they've had. And unfortunately, so many of them have had multiple accidents. And if you look a little closer, you'll find that many of these facilities are located near residential communities, often small rural communities, but some of them are also located near bigger and mid-sized cities, or even outside of very large cities. There are, you know, a few dozen plants in this country that if there was an accident, it wouldn't just be one neighborhood being leveled. You know, it could affect up to 1 million people. And you know, so we have to kind of look at this in regards to, you know, these aren't just operations and stores of chemicals that kind of exist in, you know, in their own world. They're actually right down the street from places where people live and go to school or work.
You mentioned that there's sort of this number here, the last 15 years. And if we kind of flash back the last 15 years in terms of government regulation, not just of the chemical industry, but in general, that there has been an active push by Republicans, and they've been highly successful in convincing not only the American public to elect them and to do certain things, but to roll back regulations. Now, this is just one incident where government regulations, or at least the lack thereof of government regulations or of oversight, has resulted. Now, I don't know if this is a one-to-one causal connection, but it seems like if you're looking at the past 15 years and the number of accidents that have increased, number to about 1,000, coinciding with reversals of regulations, it doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to mean you need a PhD in political science to say, could it be that there's less regulation, meaning there's more accidents because there's less government oversight and the safety issues aren't enforced?
When we look at regulation, we also have to remember that regulations can exist on paper. There also has to be the funding to enforce them. And, depending on what side you are in the policy debate, maybe there's more government funding for enforcement programs, or maybe there's less. I think it's interesting if you look at the front page of the New York Times today, several interviews of politicians in Texas say that despite, this disaster that left many people dead, they still are very suspicious of any kind of additional regulation of the chemical industry. And that's one of the reasons why it's been so hard, even at the federal level, to get legislation like the Safe Chemicals Act passed through. Some would say it's about time that we update our regulations of the chemical industry and also find the funding to enforce those regulations and inspections and hold facilities that store these very dangerous and combustible chemicals accountable for the way that they do that. That's been actually very difficult to do. There's been lawmakers trying to push legislation like that through Congress for the past 7 years, and it still hasn't been approved.
Well, you touched on something important, that there could be regulations on the book, on paper, but the enforcement of that, the money needed to hire people, essentially human resources, to go out and inspect those plants, cite plant owners who are in violation of certain safety regulations, that costs money. And Congress has control of the purse strings. And if they're not willing to fund those agencies or that department or who are tasked with that kind of public safety, then what we're going to see is more and more of these accidents possibly occurring. And you also see people, like you said, coming out publicly and saying that even though we've had this accident, we don't need government involved in this anymore.
Well, let me point something out about this data that we're dealing with here in this story. Here we have 1,000 accidents either directly involving or happening nearby very large stores of anhydrous ammonia. This is dangerous, poisonous, combustible chemical. Now, all this data didn't come from government regulators going to these facilities across the country and counting every single time that people were injured by anhydrous ammonia, counting every single time that people had to be evacuated. If you combine all of these accidents together, over 60,000 people had to be evacuated from their neighborhoods or from facilities containing this stuff. This data came from the industry itself. They actually self-reported this data, most of this data that was used to compile this map and to get these figures that we're working with. Because according to the regulations that we do have, if you store a large amount of anhydrous ammonia, if you pass a certain threshold of having this thousands of tons in your facility, and you've got to, be on a list and then report to the government. So
the Center of Investigative Government, they publish this based, the map that is, the interactive map, it's based on the industry data. It's not based on government data.
It's based on a lot of data that was actually self-reported to the government by the industry. Yeah, I don't think it's clean across the board data that completely came from the industry, but much of it is actually, these industries had to register with the government and then report to the government when they had accidents, and that's where this data came from.
So what do you think the government can do at this point with regards to regulation?
I think it comes down to enforcement. I think it comes down to plant inspections. Otherwise, we don't really know what's going on inside these facilities where there's very large amounts of toxic chemicals being stored.
It's interesting to see that the self-reporting that does go on within the industry and the data that has been used, at least in part to compile this map, shows some very scary things in terms of we live in an age where people are more apt to turn to nefarious means like terrorism to do mass harm. And I think that having now this fertilizer plant that had exploded, and it was an accident, it wasn't deliberately done, but the amount of damage that it did, not only in deaths but injury and property damage, should make people think twice, if not three times, about blocking any kind of regulation and safety enforcement with regards to the government of this industry that is so, inherently volatile because of the type of chemicals that are stored within these plants.
Absolutely. And, it's not like regulators don't do anything, but if you read the story, you'll find out that often it's after the fact. We've got Tyson Foods that only earlier this month pled guilty to, settled with the EPA and the Department of Justice, paying about $4 million in fines. Some of that money actually went to, first responders and public servants in these communities that there were poisonings by anhydrous ammonia from releases from their facilities. These were facilities in 4 different states that actually there were releases of this dangerous chemical, and at least one worker is dead from these crimes committed by this corporation.
Well, you can read Mike's piece in Truthout on this very subject, and I want to thank you, Mike, for being on Truthout Interviews.
Thanks so much.
You're absolutely welcome. Remember, you can subscribe to Truthout Interviews. I generally produce these each week, but sometimes it's every other week. I want to thank you for watching. I'm Ted Asregadoo. We'll see you next time.